Can you see it now? Okay.
Yes.
Very sorry about before. Something happened here.
Komana po kita te puna mataranga mo te tangata hei huarahi atu ki te oranga kia pua wai te iwi kia tu tangata ko mana po ki te ao ma wai koe e arahi e tiaki ma wai koe e tatoko e manaki kia pua wai te iwi kia tu tangata ma mana po ki te ao ma mana po ki te ao yeah taiki.
Tenakoto, tenakoto, tenakoto katoa. Buenas tardes a todos em Latinoamérica e especial boa tarde a todas e a todos no Brasil. And of course, a warm good morning to our panelists here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. On behalf of Education New Zealand, we welcome everyone to our dedicated session at CHI 2021. It's a real pleasure to host and moderate today's Kōrerorero. Kōrerorero originates from the Maori word kōrero, which means to chat and to discuss. Kōrerorero is all about conversations that matter, and this is why we invited our panelists to share their views, insights, and opinions about internationalization. At today's session, we will discuss why is internationalization so important and what are the short and long-term benefits it can bring to our students, institutions, and countries. We will ask our panelists to share their insights from their own successful internationalization experiences in Latin America, showing why this region has been identified as a priority for partnerships and collaboration. My name is Ana Azevedo. I am the Director of Internationalization for Education New Zealand, Manapou Kiteao. I'm based in Wellington, but yes, as you guessed, I'm Brazilian. It's my pleasure to introduce our dear panelists this morning. Dr. Kerry Taylor. Kerry Taylor is the head of the School of Humanities, Media, and Creative Communication at Massey University. He's a historian specialized in the history of political dissent and the labor movement. Kerry's publications include Culture and the Labor Movement, The Treaty on the Ground, and On the Left. Since 2015, he has been the academic leader of the College International Engagement, leading the establishment of high-level collaborations with universities, primarily in Brazil, China, Colombia, and Mexico, establishing mutually beneficial collaborations based on research and mobility of students and staff. Dr. Aaron Elias. Aaron Elias is the Associate Dean, International and Accreditation with the Wellington School of Business and Government at Victoria University of Wellington. His main teaching and research interests are in the areas of systems thinking, stakeholder management, system dynamics, operations management, and sustainable supply chains. Dr. Elias has been associated with Victoria University of Wellington since 1999. Before taking up his current role as the Associate Dean, he was the Director of MBA and Post-Experience Programs and an Associate Professor with the School of Management. He serves as an AASCP mentor and as an MBA panel member for business schools seeking international accreditation. In addition to his PhD in management from Victoria University of Wellington, Aaron has 2 master's degrees, one in industrial engineering and management from the Indian Institute of Technology, IIT Kharagpur, and the other in agricultural engineering from Allahabad University, India. Dr. Guy Littlefair. Professor Guy Littlefair is the Pro-Vice Chancellor International and Dean of the Faculty of Design and Creative Technologies at the Auckland University of Technology, AUT. Before his return to AUT in 2017, Professor Littlefair held successful roles as Pro-Vice Chancellor, Industry and Strategic Partnerships, which included key global relationships, and Dean of Engineering, leading a transformation of the academic endeavor at Deakin University in Australia. He was pivotal in positioning Deakin at the fore of the sector for its innovative approaches. Combined with an academic career spanning 25 years, Professor Littlefair has also spent time in industry, most recently at Naviman, where he oversaw the integration of the Mercury Marine business when the Brunswick Group acquired the company. Internationally regarded as the authority in the field of manufacturing, Professor Littlefair has led research teams in England, Australia, and now in New Zealand. Dr. Hugh Bixby. Dr. Hugh Bixby is a professor and dean of the Faculty of Agribusiness and Commerce at Lincoln University in Christchurch, New Zealand. Originally from Canada, where he completed undergraduate and master degrees, he's completed his doctorate at the University of Melbourne in Australia. Before coming to Lincoln University in 1993, he worked as a forest economist with government forest services in Saskatchewan and in Alberta in Canada. Still in Canada, he also worked in corporate planning in the private sector. His research interests include carbon markets, biosecurity, sustainability and certification systems, tropical logging productivity, forest products marketing, forest products trade, and community-based forest management. He has extensive international experience, especially in Southeast Asia, where he has been involved in joint degree programs and students' exchanges. Professor Hugh is also a fellow of the National Institute of Forestry. Before we start our Kōrero, I'd like to ask those joining the conversation today to send any questions through the chat box. We do want to hear from you, so please don't be shy. We'll collate the questions and we'll collate the question as we go and ask the panelists at the end. So this has been a lot of talking from my part so far, and people are here to listen to our panelists. So let's start our Kōrero. Professors, you all started your relationship with Latin America years ago. Javier and I have had the pleasure to travel together with all of you as a group. And I believe your current partnerships in the region have started with numerous visits to Latin America when you meet your partners in person. And we know Latin America is a region where that has always valued the physical presence. Over this last year and a half, what has been the impact of the pandemic and its limitations to mobility on your collaboration and engagement in the region? And I invite, which one wants to start?
Anyone?
Anyone.
Well, I mean, I'll start. I mean, it has had a huge impact. I think we're all kind of people, and one of the things I know for me is that we were using the Prime Minister's scholarships program and really building relationships through bringing New Zealand students to South America. And we're not able to do that anymore. And so we tried to do online pivots like everyone else and trying to figure out whether we could collaborate with students in online, and haven't been able to make that work as well as we want, partially due to technology issues at both ends, and as well as time differences don't really make that happen. But in the background, we have been able to do things. You know, we have a new MOU with La Salle University in Colombia that was done during the lockdown, and we've been discussing new master's programs online, but not as fast as we would if we could go there.
I'll cut a couple of things from Hugh and add a couple of new ones, I think. Certainly for students, I think the experience has been particularly kind of problematic because like Lincoln, we used the PMSLA, and I think that was a great initiative by our government to try and encourage mobility. And so that's really been quite problematic. So I think the students' connections are the ones that have suffered most acutely. Academics have moved in various ways to an online environment a lot more easily, I think, than the students. It's just more natural to have a webinar of some sort, and those things have been happening quite well. But I think the momentum that we've built up over the last few years has certainly slowed. What I'll throw into the mix is a broader one, and I'd be interested to know from my colleagues in New Zealand whether they've experienced the same thing. In our university, I think the pandemic has led to a loss of momentum and a loss of interest to some extent within the university as a whole in Latin America. There's been a slight reorientation back to the old way of looking up from New Zealand to Asia, whether it's China, Southeast Asia and India increasingly. And I think it's harder for me within the university environment to say how important Latin America is. There's less willingness to accept Latin America as a central part of our kind of narrative. So I think it's been a bigger step back than just a little bit of pandemic thing. So there's some rebuilding that we've got to do, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with Guy and Hugh and Kerry. Our experience has been mixed. The negative experience was again the students. We were also using, like you and other universities, taking students to Latin America, especially Brazil. In fact, that was the last trip we had before the COVID. After that, that student-to-student interaction has gone down. We had very good interactions with students in different universities. That has been an issue. But on the other side of the coin, the pandemic, the COVID-19 has also taught us to be innovative. I think I just want to share two things where I thought we were doing things which were different. Two things we did. One, we had 2 PhD examinations, which was completely online. This was one PhD student from Victoria being, examined in an oral examination by an examiner in Colombia, number one. And I was an examiner for a PhD student in the University of Sao Paulo. So that was something which we usually don't do, which was very, very a unique experience. The other one was, we also had online classes. By sitting here in New Zealand, some of our people, we have been taking classes in collaboration with the universities in especially in Brazil, specifically University of Sao Paulo, where we taught from here a class in Sao Paulo, which I thought was a very positive thing which COVID-19 taught. So while it has been a problem from the student side, COVID-19, the pandemic, has also helped us to be innovative.
I agree with all of the points have been made. We were planning to send some students overseas in 2020 on a study tour. Some of our architecture students were going to travel to Chile and spend some time there and then travel on to Brazil. Clearly that didn't happen. And that has been problematic, and it has delayed a number of things. I think more broadly, what's happened is, to some extent, the COVID situation and how all universities across the globe have reacted has been a real leveler. And we've all had to move into delivering things online. We've all had to learn how to be much more innovative around how we deliver programs, but also how we conduct research, and particularly how we engage with our partners right across the world. So coming out of the pandemic, I actually think we have more things in common than we've ever done before, and that certainly includes the commonalities between New Zealand and Latin America. The relationships that we fostered in late 2017 and developed through into 2019 have continued. As Pro Vice Chancellor International, I've been very keen that we don't see things just fall over. And whilst things have certainly slowed down, all of my colleagues have leaned in and continued with the work that we've set up. So we have various relationships, particularly in Chile with some key partners. Virtual student projects have continued, research initiatives have continued, PhD supervisions have continued, as well as the more strategic arrangements around MOUs and agreements of joint PhD. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, really. Clearly, we're not where we thought we were going to be. Some things have accelerated and some things have slowed down. But from an AUT perspective, we're certainly very excited about thinking how we can continue to engage, and LATAM continues to be an area of significant interest from a strategic level for us.
Thank you, Professor. So considering this fluid scenario that all of you described with the positive and negative change that the pandemic brought, like opening space for the use of the virtual space in collaboration or virtual mobility, but also maybe driving preferences for other regions outside Latin America, and considering that also like so many other countries are investing in mobility and internationalization strategies. I'd like to ask you, what has been the main driver so far for your university or faculty to grow partnerships and increasing collaboration with Latin America, and how, in the face of the momentum we are building, if necessary, we can rebuild these partnerships or review what are these drivers. One other question, can economic agreements like APEC that aim to bring regions closer together and to address important issues like sustainability and social equity influence collaboration in the education and research sectors between our countries and regions? And
I'm happy to go first on this one. I think that it's very easy for us in New Zealand to forget the influence that the LATAM region has on the whole globe. 700 million people, significant areas of industrialization, agriculture, and other things. And there is so much for New Zealand and this part of the world to learn from the LATAM region. I think where LATAM can learn from us is some of our approaches around innovation. Certainly what we do in medtech and in healthcare, also what we do in education. New Zealand's highly rated as innovative in the education space, but also our bicultural nation and the unique characteristics we have. Some of the work that AUT is doing with a university in south of Chile is around supporting that university in its engagement with their local Mapuche community. And I think our approaches in New Zealand, our proud history and our treaty is something that we can really take to the rest of the world, but particularly at this time, I think, take to the LATAM region. So I see nothing but opportunities, and it's a question of how we can collectively, as a sector and as a nation, wave that New Zealand flag really, really hard and take our expertise to the world, and also in return, learn from the LATAM region and bring things back to New Zealand.
I would agree with Guy on that one. I think New Zealand interest in Latin America compared to other regions is pretty new. I mean, so as far as a country we are concerned, I think there's a lot of untapped potential in the Latin American region. We have not really tried out. And the main driver is that the experiences we got in these few years has been very positive. Now, Victoria hosts a LATAM CAPE, Center for Asia Pacific Excellence. They recently came out with the podcast and a video on doing business in Latin America. I mean, if you hear that podcast, if you look at the video, there's a lot of potential in Latin America which we have not really tapped on. So I think it's still a huge field where New Zealand has not, explored enough, and the experience has been pretty positive. And that's why things like sustainability in APEC, these are important things we can tap on, and that particular podcast would be a very good one to hear.
I'd like to pick up Guy's comment about the the things we have to offer and the things we share in common, despite the language difficulty. And I think that's one of the things that many people in New Zealand are deterred by, because of the, how could I describe it, the rampant monolingualism of New Zealand. The capacity to speak Spanish or Portuguese is very limited. One of the things we've got as an opportunity in dealing with Latin America is to try and get out of that cultural bind. So that's something that's actually quite good for us to deal in that space. But the indigenous kind of conversation, I think, is one that we can learn. Both parties in that context can work. So we, like Guy, we're working with a community in Brazil in terms of language preservation. So there are a lot of lessons that we can share, but also learn from our partners in Brazil. In terms of the importance of agreements and things like that, yes, of course they're important. But I think one of the important things we need to make sure is that we don't treat the relationship as simply an economic one. It's got to be about cultural understanding. It's got to be about shared values and sharing values and aspirations to bring people into the conversation. And that's the only way that we're going to address things like sustainability, climate change, addressing kind of questions of poverty and disadvantage. And I think the way in which we have those kind of conversations is really important. And that's why I'm really keen for us to keep the linkages with Latin America, because I think the experiences are actually much more similar than we might think.
I'll just follow up on that, because the way Anna framed the question, what's the driver for the university? And we really all are part of a global community, and maybe it's a bit more pressing for New Zealand because it's a relatively small country with a huge, reliance on exports. So we don't have a massive internal market and inward focus. The other thing for me is I know the epiphany when I first went to Australia to study in same science, different context. And so one of the wonderful things about international connections and the importance of it is that you learn that institutions, culture, climate, all of these things mean that people use the same fundamental skills and ideas a little bit differently. And by mixing with other people, understanding why they're doing what they're doing actually helps inform things that you do back home. And so for me, that's been probably the most powerful driver from an education perspective and research about wanting to be able to collaborate globally. The one other thing, so that around the role of agreements, and I agree entirely, the agreements are just one level of it. The key thing that I struggle with all the time is trying to figure out how do you build deep collaboration when we're a long ways apart. And we often look at it's having programs or funding that does provide for mobility when we can travel, so that you can build deep relationships that then don't require all that travel, but still being able to build something that's got life and legs to it.
Sorry, I had a small problem with my internet connection, but we always say, and I think this is what partially I heard from you now, that New Zealand and Latin America have more similarities than differences, or we can be surprised with some of the similarities we find in economy and interests. Maybe a small barrier with languages, as Professor Kerry raised, but we also share, I think, the opportunity to grow the indigenous voice and values in the academic world in both regions. So in your opinion, what are the common challenges and common drivers for internationalization in both regions? And Hugo just mentioned that, like the importance of knowing what drives the person to be doing what they are doing. Which strategies or best practices could be developed to enhance the future of academic cooperation between New Zealand and Latin America? And considering, again, like this fluid moment that we are living, where we don't know if mobility will be a possibility or not, if we rely on virtual space, and how can we do it?
I'm happy to start again. The drivers for me, so the way I was thinking about it, what are the drivers? Why do I want to be involved in globalization? And it's mostly around knowledge and innovation and being able to learn from others. So it's collaborating with people that come from different perspectives. The key challenge is being able to do this in a way that you're not like a tourist. How do we build kind of deep, lasting relationships? And other people have already noted, language can be an issue. I mean, most of our students, actually, it's quite interesting. In the high school my kids went to, Spanish is really common. A lot of kids end up going to Santiago on exchange programs, but they're a small fraction of all the students who go, because New Zealand does have some strong links to Chile, in particular Uruguay, through agricultural, horticultural investments. So Spanish is probably more prevalent. I don't think anybody, oh no, Vic teaches Portuguese now, don't they?
No, it's massive.
So just to finish, I mean, so the strategies for us were, for me, it's around students and education and trying to develop joint programs, courses, and build long-term collaboration around creating what I hope will be global programs where we routinely have our students taking courses that involve universities in Latin America, Asia, Europe, whatever, and that's just normal, rather than the students spending their entire existence just taking courses from staff on my campus.
Thank you.
Can I pop into the first part of your question, Anna, in terms of the common challenges? And it seems to me it's the age-old question of social inclusion. So that includes Indigenous people, women, poor people, those in the regions, those who aren't in those main centres. And I think those questions are the age-old challenges, and we share them. Although New Zealand occasionally likes to think it doesn't have any of these social problems of inclusion, I think COVID's making it very clear that we do, in terms of access to healthcare and various other issues. So those are the big issues. How we address those, I think what we've been starting to do is have that mutually beneficial dialogue where we listen to each other, we share our experiences and our reflections. And I think Hugh's comment about kind of same science, different contexts it's really apt. I'm a social scientist, humanities person, and it's exactly the same with us. We pose the same questions, but there are slightly different sort of answers in various places because of the experience being slightly different. But there's much more in common, I think, than the diversity. So that's the common problem, I think. In terms of getting back into a kind of a more rich relationship, I think we do need to get back into a space of actual physical sharing and travel. That will be essential, but much less so than in the past. And I can see some of the questions coming through on the chat about how we get over fatigue in Zoom sessions and things. I don't think anybody's quite got the answer yet on that one.
And I would like to answer your question from my students' perceptions. As you know, I took 10 students, our Victoria University students, to Brazil in 2020, just before the COVID. We were 2 weeks in Sao Paulo. We interacted with business schools in Sao Paulo, and then for 2 weeks we went and stayed inside the Amazon forest. Incredible experience, once in a lifetime experience. When they came back, they had to make a presentation to the Brazilian ambassador's office, and this is what they said. There are language barriers, there are size issues, there are a lot of issues, but the students were very, very positive with the Latin American experience. And I want to quote what they said using that famous Maori proverb. I mean, what is the most important thing in the world? He tangata, he tangata, he tangata. It's the people, it's the people, it's the people. That's what the students saw. It's a relationship. I think most of the panelists made that point. It's about that relationship. And that's our experience. If we can make meaningful relationships in New Zealanders can make meaningful relationship in Latin America, whether they are big cities or small cities, whether it is Brazil, Colombia, Chile, any places, that's what it will count. So strategies, in my opinion, should be based on those relationships. That's where New Zealand is a small country, but it's an immigrant nation. It welcomes people from different places of the world. So those relationships are key.
I think that we're sort of poised really on what could be, if we get it right, and I'm an eternal optimist, so I hope we get it right, but I think we're poised on something that could be quite special. If the world does open up, and the indications at the moment with the massive vaccine rollout across the world, it would appear as if the world is about to open up. I think what we're going to see is even more of an emphasis on mobility. I think everyone's just eager to travel, eager to get back to the way things were. So that's a potential win. If things go the other way and we can't travel, we have to rely on this virtual environment to do our business, to do our trade, to do our education and our research partnerships, that's also not a bad thing, because we've learned so much across the last 2 years. What we do know as a sector is the importance of internationalization. So internationalization of our curriculum, of our research, the importance of partnerships, joint research collaborations, which drive research outputs. That's all good fodder for us to build a strong sector and strong universities, and that's not going to go away. What I believe we need to be much better at is a top-down and a bottom-up approach to collaboration. We know that many of our academics have international links in their own rights, and that's never going to disappear. And it's very easy for vice chancellors or senior leaders of universities to travel overseas and sign agreements just for them to gather dust on the table. What we need to do is link the top down to the bottom up. So some of the things that I've been working on is actually identifying institutions that we believe have similar values, similar structures, similar courses, similar research aspirations, and signing agreements with them. But then also incentivizing our academics to engage. In the past, that's been around incentivizing their sabbatical leave to go to those institutions, giving them preferential levers in terms of research funding and PhD scholarships to partner with students and researchers within those organizations. And I think what we need to do is we need to see more of that as we come out of this, the effects of this pandemic, because we are behind. We've all admitted on this call that we've slowed down what it was we've intended to do. But actually, I really do believe we have an opportunity. And if we get things lined up, if we're strategic and tactical about how we go forward, actually, I believe we can leapfrog where we would have been had it not been for the pandemic.
Thank you very much. I was thinking on some of the points you raised, like Guy, now about connecting the individual connections of the academics with the interests of the universities, and made me think on, and I'd like to hear from all of you, how do you see the role of the government in supporting and fostering internationalization collaborations in the academic environment? So how can governments in Latin America and in New Zealand support the goals of universities and academics in fostering these collaborations and building these relationships?
I think, Anna, allow me to start on it. I mean, government's role, in my opinion, is to start. I don't think university can depend on the government to do everything they want. I think, our experience in Latin America has shown that, isn't it? I mean, people like you in Education New Zealand has encouraged university to look at Latin America, and we went there. But at some point, universities have to become self-sufficient, and they have to do their own things. That's what I said about relationships, and others are also talking about different strategies. So as far as I understand, I think government's role is in the initial sort of, making the space for universities, encouraging universities to do it.
Thank you.
I think many of us are in the Latin American space in part because of government initiatives 5 or 6 years ago with Stephen Joyce's kind of desire to push an engagement in that space. It's not often I praise Stephen Joyce, but I think in that context, he's left an extremely strong and positive legacy. The role of Education New Zealand has been quite fundamental as well. And I think one of the things in the future, when we do have an opening up of human travel, is to not forget some of the things that were really successful in that early period. So one is the support for that student travel and the Prime Minister's Scholarship for Latin America. So one thing government can do is seed some of that work to begin those relationships back again. And I think that would be a really good, positive thing for the students. I think Aaron's right that not relying on the government to tell us what to do is the right way to do it. But the other thing I think that I've noticed is because we're a small university sector in New Zealand, we know each other. And one of the things we've got to do together is collaborate across the institutions. We can't afford to just compete with each other. And I think there's quite a strong spirit of cooperation between the 8 universities in New Zealand. And I think that's something that we've got as a strength, and we need to make sure that we keep doing that.
I think that government really has a role in terms of opening doors, and I agree completely from the New Zealand perspective. Education New Zealand and where its beachheads have been very beneficial for us, and they've certainly opened the doors. It's up to us as the university leaders to walk through that door and make the connections and make the return. You know, we know one of the great things about international education and internationalization of our curriculum and our partnerships is around the longer term soft diplomacy that we see come back. And I think that all governments realize that that's an important part of things that universities play, and without universities, they wouldn't get that return. I was pleased that Education New Zealand are going to continue to support the initiatives in Latin America. I was a little bit worried that given all of the constraints with the pandemic, that wouldn't continue, but it is continuing. I think that's the right thing to do. Nearly all of the universities in New Zealand have made significant investments one way or another in LATAM. We know that the relationships are going to take a long time. The returns that we will see, and I'm not just talking about financial returns, but the returns across multiple areas are going to take a long time, and it's going to require continued work. But I agree, we are quite good in New Zealand as a sector of working together. I think we could do more. There's always opportunities for us to do more, but at least if we get back to the point where we can all travel again and we travel as a group of 8, then we're going to achieve good things for New Zealand as well as individually as universities.
Thank you.
Right. One thing for me in terms of the role of government. So we've talked about the introduction, but there is an element of things where I see, you know, kind of longer term involvement. And one of them that I'm thinking about is when Education New Zealand and FAPESP, you know, kind of co-funded research mobility to try and develop, you know, linkages between universities and doing collaborative research. And what those do is break down a significant barrier to a lot of collaboration, which is getting together to meet and you know, build programs and do things. And I, you know, the universities aren't, you know, awash in cash that we can throw at these kind of things. And so, and I guess it comes to what Guy said. I mean, there is kind of a strategic thing for countries on both sides to help build collaboration, but it's trying to find kind of long-term funding models so that you don't just get into tourist mode. You know that if you build this relationship, you've got a plan or a way to kind of build that and make it happen in the future, because you can think of how you can fund it. I'm a dean of a business school. This is what I have to.
I think you will raise the point, like is in the world I live, halfway Latin America, halfway in New Zealand. I think it's something that really brings us together is this the way we think about people and put people in the first place, and the importance of relationships. I think this is something that is strong between us. We have one question from the audience, and that's Kay, you mentioned about reliance on China and India in terms of building relationships, or maybe a recent growing preference due to the pandemic. What do you suggest, and I would like to hear from all of you, that we could do to raise the Latin profile with New Zealand? Or do you think the world is changing to more global alliances, into a format of collaboration that rely more on global alliances? And then what would be the role of New Zealand and Latin America in this kind of collaboration that's more open and broader collaboration?
I may have been slightly controversial in my comments about the loss of space for Latin America. Certainly, it's acutely felt by me in my university. I think the way to keep that going is for those of us who spent some time there to build on those alliances that we've already got. So it's kind of like making sure that we keep alive the relationships we have, whether that's encouraged from above or done from below, as somebody else suggested in the panel. But linking those two would be quite good. My rampant optimism, and I think anybody in the international space must be an optimist, that's just part of the game, is that despite lack of kind of a strategic kind of objectives from certain areas, we can carry on doing that collaboration, either individual to individual or small group to small group. So I think that will carry on. One of the reasons we went into Latin America was partly because of the question of diversity of markets and diversity of opportunities. And I think any either intended or instinctive kind of move to narrow back to an Asia focus for New Zealand will probably correct itself after time, because focusing one's kind of opportunities in one place is a risky strategy. And if nothing else from the COVID thing, we've learned that risk is part of the environment, and we don't want to rush to court risk. We want to try and avoid it. So I think things will correct and come back to Latin America. Part of the problem I think that's been driving it is that the dollar signs have come back into the forefront of some strategy. And that's where I think the weight of numbers to the north of New Zealand may be driving that. So part of what we hope for, and I think all the universities in New Zealand who've engaged with Latin America, is to try and build diverse relationships which aren't just about student mobility and making money. They're about long-term investment in quality relationships for our students and for research and those kinds of things. And if we keep that as the center of what our conversation is, then I think there's a very strong future. So I'm optimistic, even though it sounded slightly kind of negative to start with.
And as somebody who was born in India and stayed in New Zealand for the last 22 years, I have some strong opinion about how New Zealand educational institutions have engaged in India versus Latin America. I may be controversial. I think we should learn from the mistakes we made in India. I think, the sheer focus on quantity in India, I think we made a very good start in Latin America with quantity versus quality. And many of the panel members mentioned about competition between the university. The worst example would be India. I mean, we can do many things combinedly, as a country as a whole. But the number of operations which are going on in India, not even at the university level, I mean, outside the university, private providers, I mean, and the image of New Zealand, which was quite high in India, which has gone down tremendously because of this, all the things we are trying to do there. So I really think New Zealand is a small country. There are niche areas where New Zealand should try to do. And people who are sitting in this panel, they are experienced, they know the niche areas which are good for their own universities. And we recognize that we have to move as a whole rather than, individually. So my comment to your question is, maybe we should learn from the mistakes we made in India.
One thing, Anna, for me is that when I've gone to South America, New Zealand's not on most people's radar screen. So there's some parts of Latin America that I guess New Zealand businesses have been in, there's more of a familiarity, but most of my experience is part of the change needs, it's us helping Latin America understand there are opportunities and there are special things that they would want to look to New Zealand and change the focus from North America and Europe, because it's just like that's the direction that everybody looks all the time, rather than to the rest of the Pacific. So part of it is it's how you change that perception of where there's really important opportunities for people in Latin America as well.
Thank you.
I agree completely with the sentiment around diversification. I think that and New Zealand's sector is not alone in this. We haven't got to look too far towards Australia to see their over-reliance on certain markets, and they've been significantly more overexposed than we have in New Zealand. But I think it is about diversification, but it's not just about diversification of countries. I think it's also about diversification of the activities that we do. So the importance of strategic alliances, more so than in the past, I think is going to come to the fore. We've relied too much on a mass recruitment exercise. I think what we've got to do is we've got to find partners to build a longer term pipeline of students, a pipeline of research activity, and think about what we can do at the higher level. So I anticipate what we'll see is, from a strategic alliance point of view, is more commonly we'll see joint PhD programs, we'll see joint research initiatives. Now, I do agree with Arun, we have an opportunity to get it right with LATAM. Interestingly enough, from my own university's perspective, we've resisted having in-country people in China and in India, but what we did do was we had an in-country person in LATAM based in Chile, because we saw the opportunity and we realized that having someone in that time zone could speak the language, could travel quite independently, was going to pay a dividend. And I do believe it did pay a dividend, and it continues to do so. But we certainly need to double down on our activities once we're able to. The other thing I will just say is that, it is about internationalization. So it's not about one region, it's about the entire globe. I've certainly been active over the last 12 months when I've been able to do it in person, but also virtually, supporting our activities in various regions. And, they're all important to us, but in different ways. They're all developed to a different extent. Obviously, China and India is quite mature for us. LATAM's growing, but there are other opportunities as well. But LATAM, I think, looking south to south rather than north to south or south to north, really is something that we should concentrate on much more readily. And we're keen to go. As a sector, I think we're all aligned. I think that we've all enjoyed the experiences we've had traveling through Latin America in the last few years, and we really want to see it work. We really want to see it pay a dividend for our nation as well as our organizations.
Thank you, professors. I'm really glad to listen to all these important comments about the importance of diversity, and in particular, like, diversity is not only important from the New Zealand perspective, but this reminder to Latin America that in Latin America, we also need to consider the diversity in the way we build relationships. Maybe connecting to the diversity in what are the challenges to include the diversity in an internationalization strategy, but what are all the challenges to build internationalization as well? As is funding the main challenge to build internationalization when we think outside the student attraction or the major student mobility being the major activity in an internationalization strategy? What are some pathways that institutions could follow to partner internationally?
I'll start. I think funding is not an insignificant problem, but it's also one of the things that we've experienced over time is that if you want to build internationalization as part of the ethos or fabric of a university, a lot of our own staff need to be leveraged into that, because not everyone has the confidence to, you know, go and meet new people and try and explore things. So they've got a comfortable little zone at home. So if we want to build that as universities in New Zealand to you know, really have a broad, internationally engaged faculty, there's work that needs to be done within our own faculties or universities to help and enable that to happen.
I really strongly support that. I think it's not just about money, it's about the space to imagine what the opportunities might be. And sometimes you need the people who are the converted to, in effect, almost play a missionary role in that, and giving a sense of what the opportunities might be. So when we started our work in the College of Humanities and Social Science at Massey, we started with me as a total innocent with 5 Latin American staff in my school. And they were the ones who knew the opportunities. And what's happened since then is other staff within my school and other colleges, other schools have known that there's been a positive experience, and then they've learned from that. So it's partly a question of vision and imagination as much as funding. I'm an optimist in terms of funding, that you can always find something, not always as much as you'd like, but unless you've got people who are prepared to imagine that this is a possibility, then you're lost. So that's part of the problem with the reflex move back to Asia, is it's kind of known. It's kind of the space where people in New Zealand have been comfortable dealing with for 30 years. That's why I think we need to keep that kind of space of thinking about the connections with Latin America as part of that narrative in our sector. Otherwise, we'll go back 10, 15 years in terms of our engagement, which would be very sad.
And I don't think I'll agree with Kerry and Hugh. I mean, funding alone is not the issue. I don't think so. We had an experience. I think taking from Guy, I think it's a combination of top down as well as bottom up. You know, integrating both are important. I'll just share an experience. We had funding from a particular country, a particular university, and the staff from our university were invited to go there for a week. So this was fully funded to a particular country, funded by a university in that country. And as the International Associate Dean, I advertised through the business faculty, there was not a single taker. So funding alone was the issue. It is also a change in mindset of our own people. You know, we are still interested in, I don't want to name that, certain countries, certain geographies, certain type of relationships. We have to change that mindset, you know. Then only meaningful internationalization will change, will happen.
I think what we've got to try and do is be much more multifaceted in our approach. You know, I said at the outset of this chat that I am an optimist, and one of the things that I believe universities are good at is finding money for a good idea. So we've got to come up with that good idea, and somehow or other the money will follow. But thinking about where we need to be much more multifaceted with our strategic alliances going forward, we need to find partners and engage with partners where we can engage in the undergraduate space, even in the pre-degree space where necessary. Postgraduate space in the research space. We build study tours so that we can get that mobility of students, and also how we can engage with our researchers and with our academics, and through sabbaticals offering opportunities for our academics to go overseas and spend some time, you know, develop their research, but also understand the culture, learn some of the language and bring something back. That's what's going to serve us well in the future. And diversification, as we've already spoken about, is important, but the diversification of how we do things is also important. So the reliance on fly in, fly out, I don't think is there anymore. The reliance on, you know, systems where students come and study for 3 years here in New Zealand to get their undergraduate degree, probably not going to be as prevalent as it has been in the past. Who are the partners that we can work with where students can study in two countries? They can get their foundation perhaps in one country and then come here and finish their senior years, or they complete their senior semesters. So it's really rethinking what we do. It's not a complete change, but I think that we have some honing to do around what we've done in the past to make the difference going forward.
Thank you. Thank you so much, professors, for joining us today. We have only 3 minutes left. For me, it has been an amazing experience to hear from you on your views of the connections, relationships between Latin America and New Zealand and about internationalization. I'd like to use this time to ask you if you have any last messages or insights that you'd like to share with the audience before we close our session.
Just very briefly, I see nothing but opportunity in terms of how New Zealand and how our university sector can engage with LATAM. We've continued to do the best we could under very difficult circumstances, but we're looking forward to times where we can travel or times where we just need to lean in and continue to do good things. LATAM very much is a future for us.
Well said, and I completely agree.
Yeah, no, I agree with Guy, and so I mean the only thing I would say is just encourage, if there are people who've been watching this who haven't yet met one of the New Zealand universities traipsing through their area, to do get in contact and just see where conversations might go.
Yeah, I hope COVID-19 will teach us more innovative approaches to deal with Latin America.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much to everyone who joined us today. We hope that you enjoyed the session as much as we did. If you'd like to get in touch with us or with our professors, please take note of the email addresses are available at the chat. You can also visit our kiosk at the conference, and we will be really happy to help you to get in touch or to set up a meeting. We look forward to seeing you here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, when the time is right. We will see you again soon online, and in the meantime, kia haka, stay strong. That's it for our session today. He kona mai, gracias, obrigada, and bye for now. Thank you very much. Kia ora.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to close the session now.